Welcome to today's webinar on integrating epigenetics and personalized health into your programs and practice. This talk is designed for personal trainers, it's designed for nutrition coaches, it's designed for life coaches, people who are trying to make a difference to individuals' lives through coaching their behaviors, coaching them into fantastic lifestyle habits, and also programming and giving a little bit of prescription in their scope of practice as well. Today, we're going to be going through some of the biggest principles when it comes to understanding what you need in order to design a personalized program for somebody. We're going to help you understand what's possible with the current technology, some of the considerations you need to make as well, and also how you can bring this into your business and be a health professional of the future using somebody's genes and their gene expression to prescribe them the program that is actually going to make a difference and sustain their health for as long as possible. Without further ado, let's get into it. So today we're going to cover the overview of the science. We're going to talk about epigenetics in a simple way so that you can understand it and explain it to your clients. We're going to talk about what triggers your genes. We're going to talk it through a couple of case studies that really help you understand what's possible now for the programming that you're currently doing and how that can be improved. And we're going to talk about client adherence and your business using epigenetics. One of the hardest things about being a health professional is keeping your clients around, giving them the best results that you can, and coaching them the way that their genes actually prefer. And all of this information is now available, which is very, very exciting. So when we are finding a place to start, we need to know, firstly, that we need a better solution than what we've got right now. Are we satisfied with getting 60% of people the right advice? Think about this for a second. Imagine if you were part of the 40% that wasn't getting the right advice, even though it's the same that everybody else is getting, 60% of people will actually get some sort of benefit from it. I'm sure that you can reflect on clients that you've had where you've done exactly the same protocol, exactly the same prescription, exactly the same program, even exactly the same coaching strategy, and they haven't responded like the person before. Why is this? Well, this is to do with our genes. And this isn't just a problem with the programming that we're doing. It's not just a problem with the way people receive information when we're coaching. It's got to do with medicine as well. And what we know is that even within medicine, with our standard drug treatments, these are the ones that we are clinically using all of the time, knowing that they are designed for certain conditions. Our best result is only 62% of results. We only get a great result for 62%. Imagine being in that 38. Do you want to be there? And then when we start talking about other conditions, we see that we get a much lower strike rate as far as how effective these medications are. Something needs to change, and it's not just at an exercise level, it's at a medical level. We need to be much more specific about how we're going to go about these health interventions, and because they can't be one size fits all, because clearly they don't. Even when we start talking about things like lifestyle medicine, we're talking nutrition and exercise, there are proven reversal effects for lifestyle medicine. We know that it reverses diabetes. We know that it reverses heart disease. However, even something like the Mediterranean diet, 30 to 50% of people will receive a reversal of their disease. This is a problem because it means that 50 to 70% aren't getting their disease reversed and they need something different outside the Mediterranean diet. The same thing goes for exercise protocols. In every single exercise protocol, there is 20 to 30% of people that do not get a result. They do not respond to HIIT training first thing in the morning. They do not respond to boot camps. They do not respond to straight out strength training. Not everyone requires the same thing. In fact, everybody requires something slightly different. And if we don't take this into account, our lifestyle medicine will be in the same place that medications are right now, and that's only effective for some of the people in the world. So what are we going to do and where are we going? Our future has to be in personalized health that looks at how our genes express. People are obviously different genetically, but then you are different from moment to moment, and we need to know how different that is so that we can come up with an intervention that's going to work for you right now. This technology is now available. We also need health to be preventive. We need to be preventing disease rather than fixing disease after it's occurred. In order to do this, we need to know what kind of conditions you're predisposed to. We need to know what environmental things are going to trigger this for you. And in order to do that, we need to understand your genes. We need it to be predictive in that sense as well, and we need it to be person-centered. We now are going towards a place in our health where it is going to be the individual who knows what they need. They are just going to need help from you not all of the information inside your brain. They're going to need your experience, absolutely. However, the information is going to be theirs and they're going to be sharing it with you. And this will make a lot more sense as we go through today. So let's have a bit of an overview of epigenetics so you can understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about epigenetics, the first thing we have to understand is our DNA, our genes. Our genes are exactly the same and does not change from the moment we are conceived all the way through to when we die. That seems kind of strange because obviously when you're an infant, you look very different to when you're 70, but you have exactly the same DNA. Well, obviously, your body changes in response to an environmental change. Time is an environmental change. Over time, your body does different things. It's exposed to more food, it's exposed to more or less exercise, and as a result, it changes. This is called gene expression or epigenetics, and how you look, how your body functions, all of the different markers that describe you is called your phenotype. Your DNA, the stuff that doesn't change, is called your genotype. Hopefully those terms will make sense by the end of today as well. Now, the things that influence your epigenetics or your gene activation are things like exercise, are things like nutrition, are things like emotional health and your environment. It's far more than just a little bit of food and exercise to make sure everyone's okay, or making sure everyone does HIIT training to turn on their fat-burning genes. It's just not as simple as that. In fact, we need to accommodate all of these different factors and so much more in order to get the best answer for somebody, because all of these things influence whether a gene's going to be stressed or not stressed. The godfather of epigenetics is Bruce Lipton, particularly in modern medicine. What he did, he took 3 test tubes, put a DNA identical cell in each of the test tubes, exactly the same cell, exactly the same DNA, they were clones of each other. And in those 3 test tubes, he grew muscle, fat, and bone in each of the test tubes. One was muscle, one was fat, one was bone. The difference was the environment that the cell was placed in. We used to think that all of the information and the determination of a cell was from within itself, but it's actually how the environment influences that cell. The same cell produced 3 completely different tissues. Therefore, it must be the environment that really determines our health. And now we know that 95% of disease is manageable through altering the environment, which is so critical to understand. They confirmed this with a trial looking at those in Scandinavia in the 1800s. They found that if a family's generation went through a feast where they had a big harvest, the next 3 generations were shorter in stature and also had a shorter lifespan. This is pretty cool. Understanding that you can change something in 1 generation and it affect the next 3 is really important, because what they also found was if one of the families went through a famine, the famine would create a longer lifespan and actually a taller stature. So people were getting taller and living longer over the next 3 generations. This is no longer a matter of waiting for millions of years for Darwin's theory of evolution to come true. We can change our health and we can change our generational health right now, and it will influence the next 3 generations. This is very, very cool information, but when we're starting to talk about, what's actually happening at a molecular level, it's good to understand that a little bit. Let's say that you go to the Antarctic and it's very, very cold there. What happens is your skin's gonna go goosebumpy, your hair's gonna stand on it, and you're gonna start shivering. So what this cold environment does, is it changes the configuration of the DNA and the histone, which is called the chromatin. Now you can see the DNA is the orange strand and it wraps around those blue tubs called the histones. So what happens, if you can see along the bottom, a reading machine goes along that line and says, what genes can I read today? And obviously the 2 histones have moved apart and they've exposed gene Z. So gene Z can now be read, and that's your shiver gene. So now you're gonna start shivering because it's cold. But what happens when you get warm again is that those 2 blue tubs move back together. And you can see just to the left, under the red dots, there's some yellow genes that are actually hidden right now. What happens to gene Z when it gets warm is that it gets hidden, so it can't be read, and so you stop shivering. Hopefully this makes sense, but this is molecular biology. It's as complex as we need to go today, but this is what's happening to your genes. You have gene Z all of the time, but only when it's exposed, only when those blue tubs pull away due to cold weather will you start shivering. Similarly, When it gets warmer, those two blue tubs will move back together and you'll stop shivering. This is very, very simple, but this is effectively what epigenetics is, and so many things affect whether those blue tubs are together or apart. So to help you understand that a little bit more, these two rats, just like the cells in Bruce Lipton's test tubes, are genetically identical. There is not a single gene different between these two rats. They're both from mothers that are genetically identical as well, and they both look exactly like the rat on the left. Yellow, obese, and it's also diabetic. What did they do to create this other child that was lean, brown, and non-diabetic? Well, I need to give you some background. The first thing is that every single rat in this family is yellow, obese, and diabetic. However, when the lean brown mouse was in utero, so it was an embryo in the mother's womb, they started bombarding it with nutrients that we know change gene expression. They moved those blue tubs so that different genes were now able to be read. So previously, all that gene reader had been reading was yellow, obese, and diabetic genes. Now, with the addition of folic acid, betaine, vitamin B12, which we know changes the configuration of your DNA, this rat is now lean, brown, and non-diabetic, even though they're exactly the same. What's happened is they've changed the expression of the genes. This is such a critical thing to understand, is how profound the changes can be just in one generation if we understand what we've got to do. So when we start talking about humans, we know that smoking affects the next 3 generations when done in utero. And so this is an epigenetic change that's hardwired. It's lasting 3 generations, so it's got to be fairly stuck in there. However, then there's something like coffee. There's a particular gene that processes most of the coffee out of your liver. If you've got sluggish genes for this coffee one in particular, you've got a higher risk of heart disease if you have a high coffee consumption. If you've got a really fast gene, you'll have a lower risk of heart disease if you've got a high coffee consumption. However, for those people with a sluggish gene, if they eat lots of broccoli, it actually increases the speed at which they break down caffeine, and it may not affect their risk now as much, even though they've got the sluggish gene. What we're saying is this: you've got genes that are hardwired, almost hardwired, I should say, that will last 3 generations. And then we have those genes that are influenced very, very quickly, whether it be by another bit of food, whether it be through an environmental stress, but it just allows a small, fast change in that gene expression, and then it goes back to normal as well. So we have different levels of the way genes can change their expression. And you can think about your exercise programming or nutrition that you've offered to someone before. When you change their food, it changes their body, but if they then go back and don't do that anymore, their body will change back. So the genes turned on, the genes turned off, all based on what they're exposed to. And a really simple example is this as well. When you go to an island, you feel like, taking your clothes off, you feel like being social, you feel like going to have a nice cold cocktail or a nice cold drink to cool you down, because this is what happens in warm weather. Your body opens up, you become more social, you definitely don't want to be wearing heavy clothes, and you're wanting things to cool you down. Whereas when you're in winter, normally you're wanting a quieter night, you're wanting hot soup, you're wanting to wear lots of clothes, and you're wanting to just rest up, because that's what your body asks for when it's very, very cold. These are changes that we know about already. We already know that these things happen to our body, but we probably don't understand or don't consider that this is actually affecting our health as well. And our residual temperature in the background is only just one thing that's going to influence your genetic expression and how healthy you're going to be as well. So what does all this mean? Well, how does epigenetics change treatments? Well, first we need to understand what genes you have, and then we need to understand what genes are turned on and what genes are turned off. So when we used to measure genes, we used to do it in a test tube. We used to see how far certain proteins would move through this particular type of gel, and it's a very effective way of measuring your DNA. However, it's not very effective at measuring whether those genes are turned on and being read, or whether those genes are being turned off and not being read. What we understand now, and have been able to understand for the last couple of decades, is that we can reverse engineer this genetic code off physical signs and symptoms as well, not just in test tube. And this is what's really revolutionizing the way we measure genes. So the examples that I'll give you is when you look at anthropometry. Anthropometry is an incredible science that looks at ratios of your body in relation to different parts. I'll give you a couple of examples. When we measure the length of your jaw, it's associated with the amount of growth hormone that you're exposed to. When we measure the length of your femur, it tells us how much testosterone you had as a child. When we look at the length of your fingers, whether it be your ring finger or your index finger, it also tells us how much testosterone you've been exposed to as a child. When we have a look at the length of your trunk, it tells us about liver conditions. When we have a look at your waist, it tells us about diabetes, it tells us about heart disease, and I'm sure that you already understand little things like that. But what you may not know is that the thickness of your wrist and the thickness of your neck are independent risk factors of diabetes. You can have a flat waist, but a thick neck and a thick wrist, and it will mean that you're more predisposed to having diabetes over time. There are so many relationships like this, and so much research has been done in it now that we can evaluate a skeletal structure and determine what types of genes are available and also how those genes have been expressed throughout lifetime as well. Now, the way we can do this and use the library of the skeleton as a reference guide is when we go back to embryology. You may have heard of ectomorphs, mesomorphs, and endomorphs. Well, they actually come from terms found in the embryo. So the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. The ectoderm, interestingly, is where you hold your central nervous system. It's where you hold your skin, and that's the layer of the embryo where these organs develop. Similarly, for a mesoderm, it's where your cardiac cells are, your skeletal cells are, your ligaments, your tendons, your reproductive organs, your kidneys, your heart, some really important tissues in there for movement. And then we have the endoderm, which is the lungs, the thyroid, the digestive cells, the pancreas, and even things like the liver are developing in the endoderm. Now, what's really fascinating about this is if you were to picture the classical type of mesomorph, typically they're shorter in stature, they're muscly, they've got sinew, you can really see all their muscle tissue. You'll just know that they're high energy, you'll know that they love moving, you'll know that they're really enthusiastic exercisers, or for the most part they are. Obviously we're making generalizations at the moment. But what you see with the mesomorph is somebody who is very, very defined by movement. And the mesoderm, in fact, is where all of those tissues that are needed for movement are created. Similarly, you might find when you're thinking about engineers, when you're thinking about accountants, people who are very, very active in their brain all day and like numbers and systems and logic, you'll find that they have a very dominant brain as opposed to their body. Their brain is their big currency. And you'll see in the ectoderm, that's where the central nervous system, that's where the brain is actually being produced. So we see a very brain dominant ectomorph, and we see the ectoderm producing the tissues that allow that to occur as well. These aren't just funny little coincidences. This is where a lot of our health and a lot of our understanding of disease is actually driven from. Endomorphs, on the other hand, we often think of a stouter type body, typically holding a little bit more fat tissue, very strong, but also more predisposed to diabetes, to fatty liver, to digestive issues. And as a result, we see in the endoderm, all of these tissues are being made there as well. So what we start seeing are these very, very interesting correlations between the type of body and the type of brain, the type of physiology, and also the somatotype. Now, the problem with somatotypes is that the Health Carter model and the Sheldon method don't accurately define the skeletal structure. They accurately define the amount of muscle and also the amount of fat tissue. Now, when you're looking at fat tissue as a marker of genetics, it actually doesn't hold up. It's only about 20% heritable, the amount of fat that you have. And what we see in the research right now is 75% of ectomorphy is heritable, 85% of mesomorphy is heritable, but only 20% of endomorphy is heritable. And this is because people measure endomorphy as fat tissue, when in fact your somatotype is truly defined by bone structure, how thick your bones are, how long they are, what their ratios are altogether, independent of muscle and fat. You can't move from mesomorphy to endomorphy because your skeleton won't allow you to change that much. You might be able to put on lots of muscle and lots of fat, which might make you more endomorphic in the sense of that it's fat tissue, but this is not true endomorphy. A perfect example of this is The Rock. A huge amount of muscle, you would think definite mesomorph because he's such a muscly guy. If he was to sit on his bum, not do any exercise, he would get incredibly obese because he has a body that's incredibly powerful at storing fat tissue. So his bone structure, his height, his physical size is endomorphic. In fact, he's one of the biggest endomorphs around. Whereas a mesomorph is more likely to be sliced alone, a guy who's a bit shorter in stature with round muscle, nowhere near the absolute size of the rock, but muscly and sinewy nonetheless. So these are the differences that often got people confused about somatotypes. And as a result, it didn't allow us to make these kinds of correlations up until now, until we truly defined the somatotypes by skeleton. And in that, we find an incredible reference point for the genetics of an individual. Now, what you do when you cross-correlate that with blue eyes, with green eyes, with brown eyes, with different colored hair, with family history of disease, personal medical history, whether it be what age you are, the amount of exercise you're doing, whether it be the nutrition that you're consuming, the climate, how you're using your heart, where you live in the world, all of these things interact to tell us how your body is going to end up in the state that it's in right now. And some things, like if we take a blue-eyed, pale-haired, blonde, tall individual, their vitamin D receptors, we know, are very, very good at picking up vitamin D from the sun. But as soon as you add brown eyes into that equation, they're now not quite as good at getting that amount of vitamin D from the sun, and they need a little bit more exposure to get enough vitamin D from the sun. These little correlations, you add them up to around about 10,000 different algorithms, 10,000 different correlations, and we start to see true personalization. And we can actually determine somebody's entire genome from using measures like these because of the correlations that we have fantastic science on now. And not just that, we understand what stays the same, the genetics, but we also understand now what is going to happen to that body if they exercise lots, what's going to happen if they eat poor foods, what's going to happen if they move location, or some of those things we're going to talk about right now. Now, up until now, it's been very, very complex in understanding all of these relationships together. As a result, we go back to Western medicine, and what we've tried to do is we've tried to understand every single individual gene, which is an incredible feat. And then we've tried to piece the picture back together, but there's 25,000 genes, and the interactions of only just 2 genes are so complex that most computers can't even fathom trying to get the equations right to understand what's going to happen. Fortunately, when we look at traditional medicine, things like Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, what we see is an incredible body of research that allows us to then say, right, well, the Ayurvedic said this, let's test this against the genetics that we now understand. When you start looking at these principles and looking at them in context with Western genetics, what you find is that you can refine Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine so much so that you have genetically accurate information, but we have a bigger picture. Ancient medicine started top down. They understood all things that governed the universe, and then they applied those rules the whole way down to the bottom of health or to the bottom of the cell that they were looking at. When you come from this perspective, you start to see patterns of physiology, not just what one gene will do, but what a whole body of genes will do given a certain circumstances, given certain environmental pressures. So with this understanding of both the top-down and the bottom-up approach of traditional and modern Western medicine, we've been able to come out with an incredible model that describes how the body works in space and how we can look into the genes and really understand what's going to happen in a predictable and manageable way for our current technology. So what we end up with is everybody on a circle just like this. You'll see that the basis of this circle is based in the skeletal structure of ectomorphy, mesomorphy, endomorphy. And if we were to take a few examples, what I'd love you to do is have a think about now some of the clients that you've seen or people in your life that fit this type of prescription. Generally, when you're thinking about a crusader or sense or a more ectomorphic gene pattern, as we would describe it, what you might notice is that they're very brain-driven. They like things to be very, very logical. They like to analyze things. They like to collect data. They like to ask why. They are constantly on this search for more information, and they are constantly focused on ticking another thing off their checklist. What we also find, they're very logical, analytical. They've got a more sensitive digestion as well. Their brain's so busy that their guts play up a little bit. We also find that they're very sensitive to methylation. We find that they're very sensitive to spinal issues as well. And when you have a look at what's found in the ectoderm, it's the central nervous system and the skin. So the logical, analytical, brain-driven body actually plays out in how this person navigates the world as well, which is very much through their brain. You'll find that these people are quite skeptical, like things to be in the right order the whole time, like things to be neat, and everything has got a very clear logical rationale behind it. Now, I know this seems quite generalized, and it is, because we're only talking about a third of the population. But we're going to talk about the other two groups as well, so you can start to see the patterns emerge. So let's talk about the endomorphs for a second. Now, when you think about an endomorph, we think, yeah, they hold a little bit more fat tissue. They're actually a conservation metabolism. We look at the organs that are relevant to them, the thyroid, the pancreas, the gut, the liver, the thymus. All of these are associated with slowing the metabolism down in stress and conserving energy. Whether it be demotivating them from exercise, whether it be motivating them to have a little bit more food, whether it be just to slow their processes down generally, it's all about famine prevention for their body. They're incredibly generous with their time. They're incredibly generous with their emotional support. They're often the type of person who you go to vent and dump, and they take it because they're incredibly tolerant of stress. This is a classical endomorphic type body, and the organs that are dominant in the endoderm explain a bit of this function. Finally, when we're looking at the mesomorph, we've got the blood, the muscle, the heart. These guys are more inflammatory generally. They inflame more and then they grow more as a result. This is why they respond very quickly to exercise. They've got more oxidative stress or sensitivity to oxidative stress. They're aschematic thinkers. They like lots of variety. They like it to be dynamic. They love HIIT training. They love aggressive exercise. It really gets their heart pumping, and they get hangry. They're small, frequent meal people all of the way. Now, hopefully you guys are starting to see some patterns here that you recognize in people around. Typically, the mesomorphs are a little bit shorter. Generally, the ectomorphs are a little bit taller, and you have the endomorphs more stout in their nature. So when you have a look at these genotype patterns, these things aren't just by coincidence that they're quite opposite. It's because we have duality everywhere. And what you see on either side of the circle are these opposites. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. Now, obviously, it's not fair to define everyone by 6 types. And this is where this is the type of thing that occurs when we assess through PH360, which is the platform that's able to do this. We see that someone might have a predominant yellow gene base. You can see down there the bottom left, but then they'll have genes from other sides of the circle, and this is what creates the individual variation of somebody. We have 2 people who are only 5 degrees apart on the 360-degree wheel, and they will have incredibly different profiles. They'll still be quite opposite to the people on the other side of the circle. However, the arrow below actually represents a body type that is more endomorphic in nature. It's got more caring, more generosity, and this is to do with the prolactin or the effects of prolactin on this body. Whereas the arrow above indicates a person with a very similar physiology, but they have less of these prolactin receptors, less of the requirement or less effect of prolactin on their body. As a result, they can be a little bit more blunt and seemingly a little less caring. Even though these guys are almost identical and in the same group, you'll still see vast differences on an individual level. So this is what genetics now has been able to take us to, not just understanding, 7 genes, 20 genes. It's understanding how do these genes operate within the whole body. You've got somebody who's got, a nervous type tendency, but they've got a very, very stable physiology like an endomorph. That gene that creates that little bit of anxiety won't have the same effect in a body that is lean, that doesn't have that stability and is a little bit overactive generally. It will have much more profound effects in that different body. As a result, every gene needs to be interpreted differently, and it really depends on the basis of this person's somatotype and their constitution, which has been validated both with Western genetics and ancient medicine. And this combination of the two is really where rubber meets the road. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding of now what's available. Let's talk about some of the things that affect epigenetic triggers. So when we're looking at food, We know that meal distribution is not the same. Some people do very, very well on 2 to 3 meals per day. Some people do very, very well on 6 meals per day. And it's so critical that the majority of people who are looking to lose a significant amount of weight will require less frequent meals. And this is something that's genetically driven based on the length and type of cells in their digestive tract that completely change the way they process food and the way they should be delivered food as well for best results. We have some people who are better off being vegetarian other than meat eaters, and we have people who process things like vitamin E differently, as I gave you the example before. We then have people who have a particular gene, let's say it's the AME1 gene, which reduces your ability to break down certain starches, things like pasta, things like breads, and other various foods that have this particular starch in it. AME1 helps you make saliva that breaks down carbohydrates. Interestingly, when you have citrus and cinnamon, cloves, and you do exercise, your AME1 gene works better. But if you're in chronic stress, it doesn't work as well. In fact, it works a little bit worse. Now, when you're considering this, if you know that somebody's got a little bit of trouble tolerating starch, what are you doing to help them do that? And let's say they're in a whole lot of chronic stress. Are you going to change your strategies to allow for that? Similarly, if they start exercising more, eating more citrus, eating more cinnamon, are you then going to improve or increase the amount of starch they can have? These types of changes we're often not thinking about as practitioners, but these are considerations that we've got to make because there are programs that are already making them for us as well, which is only to aid our ability to make great decisions. We then have something like movement. Some people are prone to ligament issues, whether they've got more flexibility in their ligaments, whether they've got inability to be as agile. We've also got this huge percentage of non-responders in the population as well. So we have 20 to 30% of all exercise trials where people don't get the result that they signed up for. But when we actually have a look at the genes and training for genes, when we train for strength and we've got strength genes, we get results. When we train for endurance and we have endurance genes, we get results. When you mismatch those groups, you find 84% of the non-responders. And this is only basing it on 5 genes. We have 25,000 genes. Understanding how those genes operate will then tell us what a body is going to need as far as exercise is concerned, and maybe why your clients aren't getting results doing the same thing as everybody else. Then we have to consider winter. People lose less weight in winter, particularly when it drops below 20 degrees Celsius. Some people do far better exercising when it's colder. Some people get high cholesterol in the winter. Some people get higher blood pressure and higher heart disease risk in the winter. And when we get a cold snap come through or a big front come through in the weather that changes the temperature very quickly, we see more emergency department presentations from older populations because the climate changes the way their body works in an adverse way when it's done that quickly. We then have chronobiology. This is the study of how your body interacts with time. We know that there's times through the day when your heart disease risk is highest and when it's lowest. We know that when you're more likely to hit PBs in the afternoon when you're talking strength and endurance than you are first thing in the morning. We know there's better times for certain bodies to be asleep. We know there's better times for certain bodies to be meditating. And this is different for everybody. Understanding the genes helps us understand how we can put all this together. Then we have the mind. So some people absolutely love meditation. Some people absolutely hate meditation and want to go and hit stuff instead. Some people love family time and that is their meditation. And understanding what's going to be best for this different person is going to allow you to be much better at giving advice on how they can de-stress from the day, because we live in a very stressful world and one that needs as much support as possible. But if you're sending somebody who'd prefer to hit something to a meditation, they might actually get more frustrated because they haven't released that energy. And that is very much genetically based as to what their preference is going to be. Then as far as our social DNA and even how our brain works, we've now been able to map this incredible circle, this one that you saw earlier, to how the brain works as well. We actually see that on opposite sides of the circle, they use opposite sides of their brains predominantly. They sat people in a room for 3 hours to understand how their brain worked. And what we see is this incredible pattern. So for some people who are very logical and analytical, at the other end of the circle, they aren't logical at all. And they like things to be quite random and quite illogical. Whereas we see other bodies that are like reverse engineering thought processes where other people like to go forward sequentially. All of these things actually matter to your stress levels, because if you're trying to push your brain into a place that it's not designed for, it creates stress on your system. and it can create disease. So what we see with these genotype patterns are opposites, whether it be aloof, whether it be, and on the other side of the circle, it'd be a social butterfly. If there's a more vegetarian type, there's a high carb tolerance type with low carb tolerance on the other side. We have early birds on one side, night owls on the right, HIIT training people who are designed and love HIIT training on one side, and then hiking, long, steady exercise on the other side. And these considerations will make the difference between your client loving what they're doing or just beating their head against the wall and not enjoying it so much. So when we're talking about our first case study, we have a person who's pretty typical to walk into the gym. They would be 45-year-old female. Their weight is 90 kilos, 170 centimeters tall. Their waist is 99 centimeters. So they've got some extra fat tissue that they would like to remove. Their current issues are that they're very fatigued. They've got a high-level corporate job, using coffee to get through. Weight gain despite strict dieting and regular exercise. They're doing 4 mornings a week, boot camps ×2, a PT session, a yoga session. Previous attempts, they need enjoyment with their food. Eating and exercising doesn't seem to change their energy levels. Regardless of what they do, they can't really seem to get on top of it, and their weight doesn't respond. Their current intake, high protein, low carbohydrates, high veggie intake, 2 coffees every day, and some days misses lunch. This is a pretty standard for the type of person that you would see, and this is an actual case that we've seen go through this profile. So the PH360 assessment brings them out at a number, and they're found in the diplomat range. Now, diplomats is a combination of ectomorph and an endomorph. Generally, these bodies are night owls, and we know the way their stress hormones are positioned. They're a slower starter in the morning. They need more time to warm up in the morning, and they're not designed for high intensity things first thing in the morning. They're designed for strong and steady exercise based on their muscle fiber type. So they're designed for a big lift and then a couple of minutes of rest, and then to come back and lift again. Not these high metabolic, boot camp type exercises or really intense, metabolic type sets. When they are under mental stress, their body naturally holds weight and slows down their digestive system. Lunch should be the biggest meal and dinner should be the lightest meal based on the way their body receives nutrients. And all of this information actually comes along with the PH360 profile, so you can truly understand what this body needs. Now, so what we did, we changed the intake. So we increased the size of lunch to make it the biggest meal. We aim for 3 to 4 vegetarian dinners per week, which was a big change for them. We also increased vegetable consumption through that. We also reduced the coffee. We changed the exercise timing. We changed 2 sessions to the evening because she couldn't manage all 4 sessions to be in the evening due to timing and due to work considerations. And we also changed the exercise type. If she was going to be exercising in the morning, we were doing easy and steady pace stuff. We got rid of the boot camps because it's just not right for her. A really fast start in the morning when she's a night owl. She should be sleeping in and having a nicer, more gradual time in the morning. An easy, steady exercise allows her to do this with strength and big rest and harder cardio in the afternoon for the evening session. So she was still getting her intensity in, but we really changed how we timed the exercise, but also what we did within that exercise, depending on the time of day as well, which is all information that you get from PH360. So we also, and this is one of the most important things, we really managed her mental energy. We know that the neurotransmitters within this brain are designed for a slow, steady start, and lots of planning and then steady work throughout the day makes the brain much, much happier for this body. Some bodies like just bouncing around all over the shop, not having a set plan, but like things to be exciting. This is very, very different for this type of body that like to plan and like things to be going through a steady rhythm. So we really focused our recommendations on planning the night before, slowing the start to the day, and aiming for this steady rhythm throughout, which we coached through based on the profile that came out with the PH360 assessment. The results that we saw, if you look at the bottom, the dark green line, these are her initial energy levels throughout the day, very low on waking, good mid-morning, and then an absolute crash in the afternoon. Just by changing the way she got up in the morning, by changing her exercise to the afternoon, by making dinner a little bit lighter, she was waking up more refreshed. She had energy throughout the day, and she only had a small dip in the afternoon. And this is only after 4 weeks. We now, after having followed her for 6 months, these energy levels are now cruising throughout the day and there isn't a deficit anywhere, which is very, very exciting. What we also know is that her weight reduced significantly. She was having a lot of trouble shifting this weight, but now there's been a consistent change. The weight loss slowed somewhat over the 4 weeks after the initial couple of kilos. However, the waist circumference has continually decreased at the same speed. This is telling us that her body is coming out of stress. One of the biggest stresses was actually the timing of her exercise, the amount of food that she was having, particularly at lunch, and how she was treating her morning. These are things we don't normally consider, but this is such a basic element of chronobiology and genotypology that if you don't understand this, then there's going to be some issues with your clients not getting the results they want, because this is the type of advice that's now available for them, and it can make such a vast difference in a very short period of time. So let's have a look at case study number 2. And this is a really cool example of how a person's requirements actually change as they change as well. So we have a 45-year-old female. She's a PT, ex-ballet dancer, not overweight by any means, but the issues going on for her right now is that she had very low energy, anxiety, depression, low libido. You can see this chronic insomnia and also inflamed joints and a tendonitis that had been around for a couple of years that hadn't been resolved with numerous treatments from different professions. Her current intake was really healthy, considered by normal terms: whole grain, extra bran, fruits, nuts, yogurt, snacks. Often skip lunch, however, mix of meats, vegetables only at dinner. So there were a few things that she could have cleaned up with her food. We then also had current exercise of daily mix of HIIT training, strength and cardio, but had very little motivation just to stay with it. But she was doing it because it's her job. She was already in an environment that allowed her to do that. And so she kept going. So what we found was when we did a PH360 assessment, it was a pure mesomorph, an activator as we call them. And what we know about this body is that they need small frequent meals throughout the day, not too big meals. They need higher meat, lower grain, higher essential fatty acids, higher fruit and higher cruciferous vegetables. We know that this body as well is high energy, high libido, high focus, and has a very competitive drive when they're healthy. These are all opposite to how she's feeling right now. So her body is really not behaving the way that we would expect it to. And when her recommendations came out, interestingly, she was recommended only 1 serve of red meat per week. And typically a mesomorph are the best types of carnivores. They can eat quite a bit more meat. She wasn't able to eat that amount of meat, or at least it was recommended that she have a break from it with the outputs of the program. The grain and dairy reduction was something that was recommended to her as well. And she was also told to avoid cruciferous vegetables. Normally, a body like this requires a lot more cruciferous vegetables based on their requirements to make lots of collagen for their ligaments and tendons, which are a very important tissue for them. Recommended high fruit and veg intake. Regular meals were a focus, but we really focused on the type of food rather than when she was eating the foods. Told her to maintain her exercise because she was doing enough and doing the right kind of exercise. And what we get from this as well is we get a number of health outputs. So we get which organs are at risk, and also we get a huge amount of information in the coaches panel that tells us how to manage this case going forward. That's also available for trainers and coaches to access. So the results of the treatment, we looked at joint pain, libido, energy, mindset. And if we look at week 1, there was severe pain, lower than ever libido, and constantly tired and exhausted. After week 4, we saw no pain. We saw no report of libido, but we saw a return of focus and felt light again. This is no pain after a couple of years of tendonitis and joint pain, resolving in around about 4 weeks. What we saw from a body type point of view is that they only lost a couple of kilos, no waist change, no hip change. But on the questionnaire that helps determine the phenotype and then in turn helps us determine which genes she has and which genes are turned on and off, we found that the numerous symptoms in the health questionnaire had changed dramatically. So much so, when the recommendations came back for this next assessment, you can have unlimited assessments of PH360, there is a reintroduction of cruciferous vegetables. These were vegetables that were kept out to help protect her thyroid function, which was determined to be a little bit lower when we started. But now with these changes, we're seeing a much better increase in their thyroid function. As a result, these foods which are necessary are moved back in. We also see an increase in meat recommendations because now her body is able to tolerate this meat, whereas as opposed before, it couldn't tolerate it as well. So with these changes are now automatically produced. This didn't come from the practitioner's head. It comes from doing the measurements, which anyone can do, and then the outputs generate themselves. So it picks up on change. And what we see after 8 weeks is that there was now 4 kilos lost, 3 centimeters off the waist, 2.5 centimeters off the hip. The tendinitis, which had been a problem for 2 years, is completely resolved. The complete return of sex drive, which she was more than happy to talk to me about, which was really cool. And food as a fuel, not a threat. So this lady was a ballet dancer, was under a huge amount of pressure when it comes to her food and how she maintained her body composition. This had been something that had continued even after her ballet career. Now, what we know is that, when she puts the right food into her mouth, she is confident that it's going to be doing the right thing for her body. And as a result, it no longer is a threat. This is a huge change on a subjective level that absolutely cannot be ignored. But some of the huge things that change were these 2-year-long symptoms and significant improvements in relationships as well, which is really exciting. So there are 2 strong cases amongst thousands of cases worldwide. Currently, PH360 is being used in 89 countries around the world, and we'll talk about the greater mission for PH360 towards the end. However, when you're bringing this stuff in and using it with clients, how you get the results that you've seen above all depends on whether your clients adhere. And this is a big one because we are always trying to get our clients to adhere better. It's actually based on how their body differs when it comes to their brain health and what kind of support that they need. We know that if they're a more ectomorphic body, they will want more information and they'll want less emotion. They'll say, please just give me the studies that you need or that you need to give me so that I can understand it. I'm going to go away and read it so that I don't have to talk to you again. Now, they don't mean this, but this is what's going through their mind. It's like, I want to sort this problem out myself. I just need the information to do that because if it makes sense for me to do it, I'm going to do it. This type of person is going to need a very different type of coaching than somebody who needs more action, more competition, and moderate to less information. So the mesomorph typically, particularly the activators, are going to want to just start things. They just want to get into it straight away. Yes, they're going to want some information and they'll want to understand why a little bit, but not to the same extent that the ectomorphs will. Now, if you try and sit a mesomorph down and give them lots of information, you're going to bore them because they want to get into action. This can mean the difference between them adhering and not adhering. Then we have the more endomorphic profile, who are much more likely to be engaged emotionally, be really interested in developing rapport with you. They're not going to need as much technical science. They're just going to need to make sure that you are technically on their side. And this is such an important factor to think about. So when we are dealing with these populations, we're going to need something so different. And we're going to need super duper relationships when we're looking at the right. We're going to need to understand, what really drives this person emotionally. Where is their anchor point for, why they're going to stay on track. Whereas the person to the left, we're just going to need to get in there and get started and not talk about their feelings, but just get straight into it. We're going to need to then have our papers and our science ready for the lower population, the ectomorphs, who are going to want that information. If they don't get it, they're not going to be satisfied and you'll lose them as a client. So all of these things taken into account, you need to have a pretty good coaching process to make sure that you're capturing them. The really cool thing is that this is now available, and the types of things that, or what this looks like in clinic, or what it looks like in your gym when you're doing this, this is exactly how these assessments would roll out. So normally you would do your initial assessment, whether it be functional movement, you'd get some medical history. If you're going to order bloods, or if you had bloods and know how to interpret them, this is the relevant biochemistry, particularly if you're working with allied health or medical. And then you'd be doing the assessment. It takes 40 minutes in person to do the assessment based off very specific anthropometric marks and a very specific list of gene-specific questions that allow you to determine their whole genome, or at least the algorithms in the program to determine their whole genome and how it's going to operate best for them right now in this space, in their current climate. It even takes the current weather into account as to how this body is going to be working through the day. So when we talk about what the client gets out of this, in between first consultation and second consultation, they get their profile. They get the list of specific foods that are right for them. They get to understand why their mind works the way it does. They get to understand the environment that is best for them to be placed in, what fitness is going to be best, what type of socializing is going to be really cool for them, which seems strange that it's different for different people, but you only need to talk to an ectomorph who likes lots of time by themselves and compare them to a mesoendomorph, a connector, who loves time with people all of the time and never wants to stop. The coach, on the other hand, will get access to the back end of information to understand what organs are at risk, the types of things they need to be considering for a fantastic program, how their mind works, how their measures are stacking up, some incredibly insightful information that gives you a book and a reference guide into the person that you're working with so you can get them better results. This isn't a matter of just guessing. This is now a matter of knowing what's causing problems in people so that you can help them deal with it on the spot rather than waiting. After breaking in between consultations, we then go into the second consultation where we give them understanding of their goals, what's going to be most important for their body, even their sleep routine, when they need to go and get up out of bed and go to bed, times that are ideal for them to be doing things throughout the day as part of the chronobiology and the clock that exists within them. And then also the preferred exercise routine. And if you're an exercise professional, you can prescribe knowing that you are giving genetically tailored exercise programming, and also food structure as well. So even right down into how food works, how they've got to be dividing it throughout the day, how regularly they've got to be eating, and what type of food they should be eating as well. All of this information is available to coach. It's not the information that you are prescribing. You actually get to determine how you motivate this person. This person comes to you and says, I need help with all of this information. You aren't prescribing them a food plan. You aren't prescribing them meal distribution. This client already knows this information, but they're looking to you for motivation. And in that state, as a coach, as a motivator, you're able to talk across things like nutrition. You're able to talk across things like timing throughout the day. You're able to talk about things like sleep and have a dramatic effect on your clients' lives. Then as we get into coaching, understanding what's going to motivate different people. If they are on the green and the orange type colors, generally they're going to need weekly to fortnightly visits. And I test this out now in my clinic as well. I ask my guardians and diplomats, when would you like to come back? And invariably it's weekly to fortnightly. But if you ask a meso the same question, or an activator, it'll be fortnightly to monthly. If you ask a crusader or a sensor, it will be monthly to quarterly. It's, I just want the information and I want to get out of here. And if you were to say, okay, cool, before they say that they want to leave after 2 sessions, if you in the initial consultation say, I know you're going to be really autonomous with this, so I'm going to give you lots of information and then I want to catch up with you in 2 months to see how you're tracking with it, that's going to be music to their ears and they're going to become your best referrer. Not just that, they're also, they're on the other side of the coin. If you're dealing with a guardian who you say, I'll see you in a month, it's just not going to suit what they want because they absolutely want that support week to week. So hopefully now you're getting a bit of an understanding that different people need different things and that there are so many factors that are included in all of this. And when you consider that 25,000 new papers are created every single year, research articles that you need to stay abreast of in the health literature space, it is very difficult to try and keep all of those equations and all of those numbers in your head at one time. In fact, no one human can crunch the kind of data that we have on this type of stuff. As a result, our profession is now about becoming great coaches. It's not about being an information hoarder. You can hoard experience and you can really help people with the experience that you have. However, there is already technology that allows this data to be crunched in a matter of seconds, and human brains can just not keep up with it. Shea Wellness and PH360 is the first in this space, but in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have artificial intelligence programs. We will have things like IBM Watson that will be assessing genetic code. We'll have a search function in Google that will allow us to understand what our genes need at any given point in time based on computer algorithms that have been developed specifically for human health. The time for hoarding information has now come to a close. We've now got to use the best technical information generated by fantastic algorithms that have the right focus and also the right information input. And this is when you start understanding the strength of having the genetic science with those ancient medicines and bringing those two things together to understand exactly what lies in the middle and what is truth when it comes to health. This is exactly what PH360 has started, and it's already been an incredible journey in client results as to what really happens when you eat for your health and you eat the right way. You put yourself in the right environment, all based on algorithms generated by this platform. So hopefully this has piqued a little bit of interest. If you aren't interested in this, then you might be in the wrong profession, because this is the way our profession is going. You are going to need to understand these principles in a lot more depth. And as a result, we've designed a training program that allows you to do this. So hopefully it's okay that I'm just going to go through a few of these details now so that you can understand how you can deepen your information even further and use these things in practice to really create fantastic results like the case studies. We run a 3-day mastery series, and the goal of this is so that you can integrate this stuff into practice. When you walk out the door on day 3, you'll be able to run a consultation as soon as you leave under your current scope of practice. Now, to give that a little bit more detail, day 1, we learn about the science. We learn about the 15 different sciences that inform PH360 and how they all come together. Things like embryology and anthropometry, and how they line up with geomedicine, how they line up with traditional medicine, how they line up with nutrigenomics, with molecular biology, with endocrinology, with neuropsychology. All of these crazy ology words, all of them will come together under one roof, and you will see how they start mapping across each other. You will also understand the biotrends, these 6 groups that we've been talking about, so you can really understand the individual's results in front of you. We get not just the biotrend stuff, the general recommendations, the general guidance for these 6 types, but we have the individual specificity within the program so that you can truly understand what this individual needs. That's day 1. Day 2 is where we go through the language of the biotrends. This is where we understand building rapport, frequency of visits, consultation style, and even expectations for change. I don't know if you've ever been with a client who hasn't got the results that they expected, and they get really disappointed with themselves. Well, this is because they've been given the wrong advice. Some bodies can take 6 months to change their body composition, and that's genetically predetermined. This is a big thing to recognize. If you give them the recommendation that it's going to take 6 months for their body to change, or likely, then they're going to be much more accepting of the things that you're doing for them. We'll also teach you how to assess accurately, whether it be the measures, the anthropometrics, or it be asking the right questions as part of the questionnaire. All of this information in day 2 will make sure that you know how to coach, and you also know how to measure, so that we're getting the right results and we're also dealing with it the right way too. Day 3 is going to be on business basics, so incorporating PH360 into your consultation. We're going to go through consultation examples. We're going to use the coaches panel. We're going to talk about levels of coaches. So you can come in as a pure motivator, you can come in as a transformation coach, or you can come in as a prescriptive coach based on your qualifications. And we also tell you about your referral networks and how you can be part of the worldwide network of hundreds of practitioners talking the same language, talking genetics to their individual clients, and making huge results, even with international referrals going to and fro depending on your specialty. Protection of scope is absolutely the next thing that we've got to talk about. Learning how to talk genetics and still remain within your scope is so important. As a personal trainer, as a nutrition coach, as a health coach, there are certain things you can prescribe, certain things that you can't. Understanding how you can talk genetics and still be within your scope and provide the outputs that we've spoken about above is an incredibly important for your insurance, for the client's safety as well, and knowing when to refer and taking advantage of our worldwide web of international experts is very, very important for the client's best results as well. So we're very interested in scope of practice to make sure that everyone is working within their strength, which is what scope's all about. So you can see that there is a huge amount of value in these 3 days. This will allow you to walk out the door and literally take an initial assessment, take someone through the genetic profile, and have very, very clear guidelines on what they need to achieve and what they need to do in order to achieve that. So the total value is normally $3,091 US, but your investment is going to be $1,497. And what this does, it also comes along with a PH360 membership, which has a value of US $197. And you also get the 12-week course for that price as well. The 12-week course is about deepening your understanding even further and helping you consolidate and update into a successful health business. It allows you to be an elite coach, someone who really understands the genes of the person in front of them. So there are 3 areas that we educate on in this 12-week course. The biotrends, learn how to coach gene-related nutrition and mindset. If you're already doing exercise, we'll be teaching you about exercise programming as well for different genetic types. But we actually teach you to coach nutrition and coach mindset, coach environment, coach talents based on this person's genetics. Understand how type and time of day is critical to exercise programming. So we really get into the detail of what do you need for this particular client in front of you as far as the type of exercise, when they need to exercise, how long that exercise needs to go for, because it's all based on their genes. Understand priority for different genotypes. This has been one of the most amazing things that I've found in my practice, is that some people actually need their social life to be sorted out first, their close family and friends, and stress within those relationships before we address things like food and exercise. If you don't understand this, then you could be missing a big piece of the pie. Other bodies actually need fitness to be their major port of call. Other bodies need their mind to be the first port of call. If you don't have this information, your client is going to hit a bottleneck at some point and not get the benefits that they're after. Nutrition and exercise can only take individuals so far. Then we have the behavioral side of things, gene-related coaching and motivational techniques. So different bodies, different brains will be motivated by different things at different times. You need to know what a brain needs in order to motivate it correctly and help your clients understand that they need something different as well based on their genes. We talk about rapport and client retention, which is one of the biggest things in our health profession, is understanding what is going to give people the best results, what's going to allow them to keep coming back and want to keep coming back, and then support your client the way their body and mind wants that support. So we're really going to deepen your understanding of motivational techniques that allow you to speak to this person at a genetic level, something that really resonates with them. So 12 weeks of incredible information there. And then we go through the business side of things as well. We go through the plan, the budget, the promotion, the sales of how you would put this into practice, how you become a social force to be reckoned with as well, and then be part of an instant referral network of health professionals internationally. All of this stuff is going to happen in a 12-week course. This whole program is worth $2.5 grand US, but it comes as part of the package for the 1497. Our goal is to make this as accessible and as affordable as we can to you and your clients. As a result, we've got a webinar special. It's only $1,147 for everything that you just found out about. There's a 3-day mastery series, which we discussed. There's the online biotrend training, which I haven't mentioned yet, which comes before the 3-day training and helps you understand the basics of each biotrend so that you can really start to get a grip on what you're going to learn about in the 3 days. We're going to give you the 12-week course as well, and you're going to get an additional PH360 membership. This allows you to sell one or give one to a family member so that you can really trial a product and understand it when you arrive to the Mastery Series. If you want to find out where the conferences are around your locations, go to this website, www.ph360.me/mastery series. Go down to the bottom of the page, and all you have to do is enter the code Ultimate Health and you will receive this discount. This special is for a limited time. We only have so many seats in our professional development training sessions, and we would love to see you there. Why are we doing this? We're doing it to end chronic disease and pain by the year 2050. This is a huge vision and mission and can only be achieved with a combination of the right science, the right delivery, and the right passion. These are the 3 things that we are teaching health professionals of the future, whether it be to end chronic disease or optimize health. We are teaching health professionals the science they need, the coaching strategies that are essential, and also how to run their business so that you can do this sustainably and not be on the poverty line like so many health professionals are. If you're a PT and you want to speak to an allied health professional or a doctor and you are speaking the same language as them when it comes to genetics and epigenetics, how much easier does that become to then allow those communication lines to stay open and you to have better continuity of care for your client? This is something that's lacking right now. And after coaching many personal trainers, allied health professionals, even medical professionals as well, through an understanding in genetics and epigenetics, we know that there is a huge disconnect between PTs, allied health, and then allied health to GPs in so many ways. This common language is going to allow everyone to be singing from the same song sheet. It also gives a more complete answer. You've seen the examples of how different environmental things can play into genes, how different people are actually going to need different foods at different times of the month based on their genetic expression. This is so specific and so much more complete than anything that's been out there before. And everything is about creating self-acceptance and awareness. When people are aware of themselves and what is right for themselves, they're aware of how their brain works, and they're not judging themselves as much anymore. They're going to stop judging other people as well. This is the reason we are doing it. We are doing it for best health, for self-acceptance, for self-awareness, so that we can create a culture where people want to be healthy, where people are driven to be healthy, and where people are happy and healthy together. Hopefully you can join us. Make sure you use the link right there. Make sure you use that discount code. We are really excited to see you in a conference in Australia in the very near future.